as well. All right, so good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate your interest in this topic. Again, my name is Dr. Dory Barnett, and this is Creating Trauma-Sensitive Schools and Classrooms. This is part of a series on inclusive behavior education, a four-part series. This is session 2. Through the CSUF Center for Creativity and Critical Thinking. So you don't have to attend all of them, but we will be recording all the sessions if you're interested. So I've tried to focus each session on a topic for general ed teachers to support inclusive classrooms. So last time in February, we did restorative classroom practices. This week is trauma sensitive classrooms. And then in April, we'll do a two-part series on inclusive behavior instruction within a PBIS framework. So any burning questions or issues before we start? I do ask for participation, so I hope you will feel comfortable. So this is a little virtual inclusion activity. If you have a scratch piece of paper or a Post-it, that will work well. This is an activity that you could use with your staff, or if you ever need to do training, or even with your upper grade, middle and high school students. So I'm going to ask you and I'll give you a moment to do this and collect a paper and pencil. In the middle of your virtual name tag, if you could please just write your name. So if you have a Post-it, or imagine we're actually in person at a conference, but this is virtual. So in the middle of your Post-it or your name tag, just write your name. No problems there. Now, think of someone who made a difference in your life when you were going through school. So as a child, youth, or adolescent, think of someone who made a significant positive difference in your life and write their name on top of yours on the Post-it. Right? I'll give you a moment to fill all this in after I give the directions. Well, actually, let's do that now. We'll take it step by step. So grab a piece of paper, preferably a Post-it, write your name in the middle. Above your name, think of an adult who made a positive difference, in your maturity as a child, youth, or adolescent, sorry. Give you a few moments. All right, and then below your name, think of, I know not everyone is teaching. We have a couple of students, but in your work so far, try to think of a child, youth, or an adult, someone in school-age person for whom you've made a positive difference in their life, and write their name below you, below yours. So it looks like this: your name in the middle, the person who had a positive influence on you at the top, and the student for whom you made a positive difference at the bottom. And since we have about 10 participants, I'm just going to do this in a quick breakout. So you're going to meet with one other person. Just introduce yourself. You don't have to give the name. You can describe just someone who made, in fact, just choose one, either the person who made the positive difference for you or the child you made a difference for. But I'm going to give it like 2 minutes. So if you want to do both, that's fine. So we're going to be in a very quick breakout with one other person. You're going to introduce yourself and explain your virtual name tag, the adult who made a positive difference for you, and or the student for whom you made a positive difference, and then let the other person share. Any questions before we begin? It's going to be real quick, 2 minutes. So give me a moment just to set it up. I have 4 rooms ready, go. Okay, hello again, everyone. I hope that worked out without any technical difficulties. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
You can see
Yes.
the PowerPoint again. Okay. I was saying earlier, if you experience it, if something's not working, just let me know because I might not know. Um, all right. So, given that you were able to do that, and I had the opportunity to join a small group too, you are already using some trauma informed practices because you're building positive relationships with students, and you all shared someone who made a positive impact on you. So that was so wonderful. Keep that in mind, those people, the adult and the student, because I think it will inform our thinking as we go through the presentation. So thank you though for sharing. That was just our inclusion activity. So our goals for this session, the hour so that we have together is we're going to define trauma and discuss what is the impact of trauma on student learning and behavior. Look at how can we identify what are some of the characteristics we might look at to let us know that a student has experienced trauma. What are the learning and behavior characteristics of trauma in the classroom? And then, more importantly, what are the characteristics? What does it mean to be a trauma sensitive school or a trauma informed teacher? And lastly, what are some of the evidence-based frameworks and initiatives that are probably in your schools that are contributing to a positive school culture and climate? And thus, what are some trauma-informed initiatives within what's called a multi-tiered system of support, MTSS? How many of you have heard of MTSS? Maybe a brief thumbs up. Okay. I know Ria has. Jam Garcia has. Yay. And Regina. Okay, a lot of you have that. That's wonderful. That shows you're sort of on the cutting edge, or so multi-tiered systems of support is a framework within California, and actually in most states across the United States, to deliver a continuum of evidence-based interventions at tier 1, universal for all students, tier 2, targeted interventions for smaller groups of students that are at risk, and tier 3, intensive individual interventions for fewer students that have more critical needs. So all of these programs that we're going to address are within best practice of a multi-tiered system of support. Another key feature of MTSS is the integration of learning and behavior and mental health or social emotional supports within a single system, as opposed to separating those interventions into a separate PBIS and RTI. It's an integrated system of support. So one system continuum of support. That was just a little introductory blurb, and let's move on. So now we're going to talk about trauma. Feel free to ask questions. You can just speak out. I might not because I can't see everyone on my screen. But here's some facts about trauma in schools. So I think everybody, some of you are working to move towards special ed. A couple of you might be in special ed, but in a typical general ed classroom, research shows that I think that should be that 13 students out of a typical 30 have experienced at least a couple of what we call adverse childhood experiences, which are basically experiences in school age years, or actually early infancy up to age 18, that are considered traumatic. And in combination, those experiences can really have a significant impact on the students' learning and development. I'm going to show you a brief study called the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. Anyone hear of this? Again, I can't see everybody, but call out maybe if you've heard of the ACEs study. I and the Marine
Yes.
has, thank you. All right, but maybe it's new to a lot of you. So this is a landmark study done by Kaiser Permanente, and it was done quite a while ago, but it's still very relevant and referred to today. They interviewed over 17,000 participants who were over the age of 18, and you can actually take this survey still online. And they gave them a checklist of about 40 different experiences that were considered traumatic. Some of them were experiences that quite a few of us experienced, like maybe separation of parents, a move in early childhood, changing schools, but then they sort of went up the ladder to death of a family member while you were school age, a school age child or youth, substance abuse in your family, violence, significant illness on up. And what the study found is a direct link between childhood trauma and development of impairments as we move into adulthood. And we've all had a couple of these. We just couldn't get through life without a death in our family, or many people experience divorce. But this cutoff was sort of around after 5 or 6, those adults who reported more than 5 or 6 of these early childhood, early ACEs, adverse experiences, also displayed a higher incidence of impairments such as neurotypical development, like learning disabilities, social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. And then on up the pyramid, health risk behaviors, maybe smoking, substance abuse, and those children who really experienced, like more than 10 or 15 of these adverse childhood experiences actually had developed a higher than normal ratio of cancer, other diseases, and even early death. So the point of the study, I mean, there's a lot of interesting implications from the ACEs study, but the point for today is that when we experience early childhood trauma, and especially cumulative trauma, multiple experiences, it literally impacts our development. It impacts our brain development, and it impacts our behavioral responses. So studies have shown that trauma has a direct impact on student learning. Trauma adversely affects the child's language development, communication skills. Some of you might have heard of those executive functioning skills, the ability to analyze cause and effect, to take another person's perspective, attention skills, regulation of emotions, engagement. So multiple traumatic experiences definitely impacts brain development and learning. Um, Behavior indicators of trauma in youth, and you can see some of them are similar across middle school, adolescent, and elementary, but definitely impact in inattention. You might observe inattention. You might observe in older students irritability, at-risk behaviors, impulsivity, angry outbursts, aggressive behaviors, somatic complaints saying that they're sick a lot, poor academic performance, social impairments, difficulty making friends. And this is what research tells us. So trauma actually changes our brain's ability or response to additional input. So for instance, a student who experienced a lot of trauma sort of goes into fight or flight mode with a small incident. So for example, a student who has had a lot of ACEs or a lot of traumatic experiences has developed this sort of fight or flight response in the brain. The frontal cortex of their brain which is responsible for self-regulation and executive functioning, develops later or is more immature in a student who has experienced a high amount of trauma. So for example, they're in the hallway, they're in the middle school at their locker, and another student walks by and inadvertently, um, bumps against them. A normal student, and the student apologizes who bumped into them. A typical peer might turn around and say, no problem. But a student who has a lot of trauma and has developed this fight or flight response just might overreact and actually, throw a punch at the other student or start yelling. They're sort of dysregulated. Anyone think of a student like that you might have a experience with? You don't have to name names, but have you observed anyone that maybe responds in this fight or flight mode? And it might be because of their trauma background.
I have one.
Go ahead, without their name, please.
Yeah, I have a student X currently where I work, and I've had this student since kinder. He's a sweetheart with me because I know him since kinder. And I always speak kindly to him, but I know his family, there has been a separation and arguing in front of him with parents since he was very young. So now that he's in the 5th grade, he gets into the mode that you just explained. He just, someone else
Reacts.
says one word to him and he's just very defensive. Um, I guess because he remembers me since kinder and I always treat him nicely, when he's having some difficulties, I go and see him and I take him out of the classroom and I talk to him and he calms
Absolutely.
down. But even when he has his BI, the behavior interventionist, um, there's not quite rapport with him and her, and yeah, he just acts up like you were just saying. But I understand him because I know the family and the community liaison right now where I work. So I work with the family and him.
Yeah, well, Myrna, it
I,
sounds like you're using a trauma-sensitive approach. You're
yes,
giving him a safe place. You're
yes,
removing him from
yes.
distractions. You've created a relationship, which going back to our sandwich name tag, that is
Mhm.
key. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a perfect example. Thank you. I appreciate that. Here's another just a imagination. Imagine you're being chased by a tiger. Your heart races as you feel a surge of adrenaline, preparing your body to fight, flight, or freeze. Now imagine that right after escaping the tiger, you have to learn how to multiply fractions. How would you find this task? You can sort of see by putting yourself in that place of the fight or freeze of a trauma, a student who has experienced a high amount of trauma, you would not be able to easily pay attention and learn. So that is what it is like um, for our students that have a high amount of trauma. And research shows that even if it wasn't directed towards them, even infants who are in another room where their parents are fighting and there is violence have this brain response of fight or flight, fight, freeze. um, so it's almost like ingrained in the brain from we absorb trauma in our environment. So now let's shift to the more positive. What can we do? And let's start with, what is a trauma sensitive school or a trauma sensitive classroom? So trauma informed teaching starts with that understanding, just like Myrna, you were explaining to us, an understanding of how trauma affects the brain, learning, and behavior. With this approach, educators begin thinking about what a student's behavior may be telling them, and they reflect on practices and they try to find ways to better support students who may be experiencing trauma. So it's sort of a shift rather than looking at behavior as negative or conduct. What is that behavior trying to tell us? It may not be the student's intention to just be bad. It may be that their brain cannot handle the input, and this is how their brain has been wired to respond. Um, so that takes us to it's a trauma sensitive approach. Is actually involves a paradigm shift in our thinking. We need to change how we view students with behavior issues, and rather than seeing them as willfully disruptive and acting out, we want to, rather than saying what's wrong with you, we want to look at it in a different way and ask, what happened to you? How can I help? I know we all know Oprah Winfrey. I think, let me look at the time. Yeah, I'm going to show this really brief YouTube. It's Oprah Winfrey, as you probably know, was on 60 Minutes a couple years ago. She was a correspondent, but they did, and she currently works with Dr. Perry. I think it's Bruce Perry on childhood trauma, because you probably have heard her say that she has experienced childhood trauma. So I'm going to show the first couple of minutes of an interview with Oprah Winfrey, speaking about this paradigm shift in how we look at students with trauma. So give me a moment here. Just a moment, sorry. I have to get out of my. Okay, I can do it. Okay, somebody please tell me if you can see my. Okay, I think I did it wrong though. So I think I did it without sharing the sharing the sound. Okay, I'm gonna do it. All right, here we go. I'm just gonna share 15 minutes. I'm sorry, a few minutes of it.
Candid with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah, your story for 60 Minutes this week is about childhood trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that this story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older.
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist, he's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind, it was that person who made it?
I know exactly who did it. I know exactly the
This
moment
part's
I started
good.
to feel valued, and for me, it was school.
I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. Mrs. Duncan!
The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was.
So what was that like? I don't really remember. I do remember you.
I remember you were such a fluent reader.
Well,
if I had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for.
when you
Okay, I'm gonna stop now in the interest of time. Just a moment, I have to go back to I apologize, I have to go back to my PowerPoint. Can you see my screen now or not? Yes, you can see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that was, hi Saliha, good to see you. That was, I think really a good, just 3 minutes Oprah was able to, it goes back to our little introductory activity of the name tag and where you talked about those relationships. I didn't go to all the breakout sessions, just one, but the one I went to, both people said it was that relationship, either that the adult, the significant adult had with them, and that positive regard, and their relationship with the student for whom they made the positive difference. And then Myrna, your beautiful story, you just absolutely described that you developed this relationship, and that makes all the difference. So that is the found relationships and positive regard and believing in students and asking what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you is the foundation of a trauma-informed perspective and trauma-sensitive teaching. So many of you, most of you, we all have this. We're just putting it into research and professional terms. So I have a little case study, and we're going to divide into breakout rooms again. So you might want to take a quick photo. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I'm going to read it to you. So imagine you're a teacher, or you're observing a teacher, a fifth grade classroom, and this is the teacher speaking. And she gets a new student named Ashley, and she describes this incident in her classroom. Ashley just transferred into my fifth grade classroom after being placed in foster care. I wanted to make her feel welcome. I moved to put my hand lightly on her shoulder when I was explaining an assignment, and she slapped my hand away. Then she stared at me defiantly. So we have a couple of cues that Ashley is new. That's one adverse childhood experience, that she's changing schools in the middle of the year. She's in foster care. That tells us, something happened in her family that made her, be required to leave. So she's obviously got a lot of those adverse childhood experiences. So what just based on our discussion so far and just your own intuitive knowledge, in the breakout session first, how might a trauma-informed teacher respond to Ashley in this classroom situation, and what mistakes might an uninformed or a non-trauma sensitive teacher make in response to this scenario? So again, I'm going to divide this into small breakout groups of 2 or 3. Introduce yourself and talk about how a trauma-informed teacher might respond to Ashley. Maybe first talk about what mistakes might an uninformed teacher make, and how might a trauma-informed teacher respond. All right, any questions? All right, let me start the breakout rooms. F2. Do them. Darn. All right, here we go. There's going to be 4 breakouts with 2 to 3 per person. Here we go. Hello?
Pardon me. Hello, how are you?
Are you, is your breakout room working?
It is working and I was just with Meg and we talked about what an uninformed, trauma uninformed a teacher might do, which is, let's say, to an overreaction of a student. The teacher who is not informed about trauma might overreact and take it personally. When
Right.
in reality, the student is just protecting him or herself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna leave for a moment. I'm trying to figure out. All right, I'm gonna close the rooms.
Okay.
All right, welcome back. Let me. Okay. All right, so let's thank you for having a conversation. All right, you can hear and see me? Okay, thank you for having that conversation. So based on your discussion, let's let's talk first and then I'll show you the slide. So what kinds of mistakes did you discuss that a non-informed teacher might react to Ashley? Anyone can share.
That she's going to be a behavior problem.
Just to say that slapping your
first
hand
meeting.
away was
Yeah.
and treated as a conduct, right? Anyone else? What other kinds of mistakes might a non-sensitive teacher?
We was discussing with Meg that an uninformed teacher might take it personally. And
Mhm.
approaching a child, the child might go, no, don't touch me or something. And then the non-informed educator will say, don't do that. You're just being disrespectful. We don't do that like that. in the
Right.
classroom."
And then you've got this
Don't take it
escalation
personally.
of behavior and it creates a negative behavior chain. In contrast, what were some of the strategies or approaches that a trauma sensitive teacher, how would that person respond to Ashley?
One thing
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think the teacher should create an chance to explain herself, and she needs to find it out what kind of problem she's facing, and direct them accordingly. Like behavioral therapists, psychologists, or different,
So get her more help, get the
Yeah.
student more help.
Yeah, she doesn't know how deep is the problem or what kind of problem is that. So she can direct that accordingly.
Thank you.
So
Anyone
Dr.
else?
Barnett, I
Yes.
had a question. Did she know about Ashley's ACEs?
I think that's a
before?
great question. I can say based on my experience, she may have had little. It depends on the type of information that is gathered and shared and the MTSS system, the strength of it. I think at a school, I think it's 50-50. I think there might be some schools where the student is transferred in and the teacher has very little information.
Sure.
And there might be other where there's a counselor and they take the time to explain to the student, hey, the student is in foster care. She's been through a lot.
Mhm.
But I'd say it's 50-50. Does anyone, that's a great question. Any other comments on that? Would you?
From what I know in at least in my district, it depends on the school and if it's a transfer, it may
Mhm.
take some time for the paperwork to get there.
Absolutely.
Let's take this in mind that we as educators and people who deal with youth, the fact that we hear foster care means that there's got to be something that
Right.
happened. And as we say, there's nothing wrong with you as what's happened to you. So something has happened to the student that was in foster care. So not to say that there's a stigma or a label, nothing like that, but to say
Right. Not a stereotype,
uh,
but to be
try
sensitive.
to approach the student. For example, if I were to have Ashley, I would say, hi, Ashley, how are you? Welcome to my classroom. And depends on if she needs my help, I would say, may I approach your desk? Or
Excellent,
may I
Myrna.
put my
That
hand
is
on your
great.
shoulder? Good job.
Right.
Or I would
Agreed.
say,
It
tap
was-
your shoulder, you did a good job, instead of
Right.
tapping her shoulder.
and
Well, let's take a
yeah.
look at some of the typical uninformed responses. So this is a teacher, and several of you talked about this or predicted this response. So in response to the scenario we were dealing with, the uninformed teacher says, why she decided to slap me is beyond me. I was trying to be helpful and welcoming. Her reaction was totally out of proportion to the situation, which we know is typical for a student who has experienced trauma, that they overreact. Physical aggression simply cannot be tolerated or excused. She needed to learn that right away. There had to be an immediate consequence if I'm to maintain order in my classroom. That's taking it personally, right? When I tried to remove Ashley to the office, she just lost it. Instead of complying, she chose to struggle and started kicking me. I don't like to see students suspended from school, but Ashley needs to learn that she cannot behave that way in school. So very unfortunate, but this is a real response from an uninformed teacher. So all the things that you brought up, she took it personally. She didn't take the time to build a relationship. She was not sensitive. She didn't understand the impact of trauma and the brain. Okay, so in contrast, here's our trauma-sensitive teacher response. I might have frightened Ashley without meaning to. It's clear she does not want to be touched. She may have other triggers as well. Right now, she's hyper aroused and feels cornered. If I put any extra demands or expectations on her right now, she could escalate, and that will just make the situation worse. I told Ashley we would talk about what just happened when she calms down. I need to help her feel safe, or she won't be able to learn in my classroom. I know it's common for kids in foster care to have trauma. I need to find out more about what her needs are, maybe from her school records or from her foster parents and caseworker. If I need to, I'll contact our SST team for support. Excuse me. So who can call out, just call out what was one trauma-informed response? There's several in there, but just call out what was one trauma-informed response in this last scenario. Anyone?
I like the
need
one
to
that
make her feel
says,
safe.
I need to help her feel safe, or she won't be able to learn in this.
Okay, so I heard
Agreed.
two people say that. So the
It should be a
understanding that
safe
she needs to
environment.
feel safe.
That's why we
Excellent.
teach us, right? Because we're caring. Yeah.
The need to find out more about her needs.
That was a great question that several of you brought up. What's her background? What's going on here? Very proactive. Thank you. Great job. And
Realizing that she has other triggers too, and so to approach her in a different manner than just any other child. Maybe asking her, would you like a hug? Would you like to, or what are you comfortable with? Such as I see classrooms greeting the children in the morning, a handshake, a hug, a dance, etc. So realizing that there may be other things that we need to do as teachers for her and our other
thank you so
students.
much for that. Wonderful observations. Very trauma-informed perspectives. Thank you so much. So in the short, excuse me, time that we have left, I want to go over some evidence-based programs and initiatives that you might observe in your school that are considered trauma-informed, because they, in combination, they provide some of the qualities and characteristics that you just talked about. So one program that we talked about in session 1, and Sliha was on this was restorative practices. Restorative practices are defined as a framework for building community and responding to challenging behavior through authentic dialogue, coming to understanding, and making things right. So a school that is implementing a restorative approach is building relationships. And going back to our icebreaker, our inclusion activity, it's those relationships that make positive change. It's those relationships that are the foundation of a trauma-informed approach. So some strategies, trauma-informed classrooms might have community circles to help students collectively build trust and deepen relationships, and also a way to help students safely express their feelings. And teachers are trained in strategies such as effective statements, how to ask questions to resolve a conflict and decrease or de-escalate a situation. So that is one. Restorative practices is considered one trauma-informed approach. I think I skipped one here because PBIS was supposed to be here. I don't know why it's not. Another practice is social emotional learning. And I know that many of your schools are implementing a social emotional or SEL approach, and you've probably gone to some workshops on that. I know a colleague of mine, Dr. Sangeeta Carmona, has led a lot of workshops on social emotional learning. Social emotional learning is defined by CASEL, Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. It's a great website, as the process through which young people acquire and apply skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage their emotions, and achieve their personal and collective goals by showing empathy for others, building supportive relationships, and making responsible and caring decisions. So if you're practicing social emotional learning, you're also practicing a trauma-informed approach. For some reason, I don't have my PBIS slide, but many of you might be familiar with PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. So in a classroom, and we'll talk about this more in session 3, just PBIS classrooms and schools establish 3 to 5 positive school-wide or classroom expectations, maybe like be safe, be respectful, be responsible. They also reward students or reinforce students for demonstrating pro-social behaviors. And what this does is create a consistent and predictable routine, so the classroom feels safe and protected to them. Whenever we go into a new situation, we want to know what the routines are. We want to know what is expected, and that helps us feel safe and build trust. So PBIS, social emotional learning, and restorative practice are some of the 3 largest evidence-based practice for creating a trauma-informed school and classroom. This is an MTSS pyramid of supports that is trauma-informed. It was created by the University of California at San Diego, Healthy Environments and Response to Trauma in Schools. It's an acronym. HEARTS is an acronym. And they've done a lot of research on trauma-informed practices in schools. So you can see at the universal or primary tier, some trauma-informed practices might be just using a trauma-informed lens. They have PBIS, they have social emotional learning, they have restorative practice, they have teacher training on trauma-informed practice, promoting staff wellness and addressing stress and burnout. Why might that be? Why might addressing staff stress and wellness also be a trauma-informed approach? Any ideas on that?
Because when we're agitated, we transfer it on to our students with spillover. And so
Exactly.
if we can approach things in a calm and reasonable manner, we can expect our children to model our behaviors and be models for our children.
Wonderful,
students.
thank you. So when we're introducing social emotional learning mental health for students, we also want to make sure that those programs are available and that staff are modeling the same characteristics. Then at tier 2, the targeted level in a trauma-informed school, we have care team meetings, which is a version or another name for a student intervention team, where information, some of you brought out, well, is this student's needs being addressed by a team at the school? I would want to raise it up. So having those teams that meet regularly and address the needs of students who have a trauma background or who are at risk for behavior and mental health. So again, at tier 2, restorative practice might be having restorative conference groups and more directed, targeted support groups for students that are at risk. And then at tier 3 are students with more critical behavior and social emotional needs. We might have IEP meetings, we might have crisis management, consultation with teachers, we might have actual mental health and psychotherapy and intensive individual counseling available on site for students. So this is a sample pyramid of support that addresses students' needs across the tiers in a trauma-informed school. So now, how much time we have left? We have just here's some other programs that you might have at your school. Just AVID, which is a support for underrepresented minorities who are maybe first generation, providing them extra support for their academics and behavior, bully prevention programs, conflict resolution, even STEAM support, any support program and intervention that is evidence-based is going to contribute to a positive school culture and climate, which in turn creates a trauma-informed school. So we don't have time for a breakout, but just thinking about your own school sites, what are some trauma-informed programs and activities that you might have in place? So just let me know if you'd like to share. Inaria, what stands out to you? Do you have some things in your school where you're practicing?
Well, I tried to work, so not like school-wide, but I think in my classroom, I tried to work with my paraprofessionals to think about the behaviors, and because a lot of my students don't speak yet, not only not take it personal, but try to interpret their behavior as
wonderful. So proactive
Yeah.
approach. Thank you. Anyone
I
else?
know, I know in the classrooms that I've interned at or volunteered in, PBIS is the biggest thing that they do. Also SEL, usually SEL Wednesdays. So it's a day devoted to lessons once a week versus things. And then I know in my daughter's school, they have the be safe, be responsible, be kind as their motto and what they expect from the students on campus. So PBIS is what I see as a very large piece of the public school
School-wide.
system. Yeah.
And what district are you in? What district?
She would be in the Fullerton School District.
Oh, I'm studying there.
Yeah, she's at Rolling Hills Elementary.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Fullerton is a great model.
It is.
I'm at Fizzler.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a great model. They really care about mental health. Thank you, Pam. Anyone else quickly before we go? What have you observed in terms of trauma-informed classroom or school-wide practices?
When I had my placement in the fall, there was a really good general ed teacher that did a lot of restorative practices. She would have circles every morning, they would meet, and then on Fridays she would have rose and thorns type of things that the kids could share what was a rose from the week, what was a thorn from this week. She was really open on building that sense of community in her classroom, so that way the kids would then engage with the curriculum. So I was really impressed with how she connected with the students and understood that their need to really feel safe at school would then help them, you know, learn the, like, help them in the school setting in general.
Oh, I love that she created that weekly safe space. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of research that just meeting in a group like that is going to decrease bullying, because when students trust one another and build relationships, they're very less likely to go out and kick and hurt one another, and then they have that safe place to come back to. So thank you for sharing that, and I love the roses and the thorns. That's a good one. All right, well, you've been a wonderful group of participants. I'm so grateful that you all showed up. I really appreciate that. The PowerPoint should be available for you. I provided it to Dr. Gutrao. So, or if not, just feel free to email me. I'll put my email up and I'll send you a copy. Here are several resources. I have the websites for each of the 3 programs that we talked about. CASEL, Restorative Practice, which is the IIRP, International Institute for Restorative Practice. And then the PBIS clearinghouse is called pbis.org, Center for Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports. Those are wonderful websites. And then some more specific resources for trauma-informed teaching. There's a child trauma toolkit that you can download for free. The National Childhood Trauma Stress Network, I've listed their website. And We Are Teachers, what every teacher needs to know about trauma. Great websites and resources too. And here is my information. I actually did list my Fullerton School District, where I'm working part-time as an interim psychologist right now. And I invite you, I hope you will come back in April. There's the 2 inclusive behavior instruction workshops in April at the same time from 9 to 10 will be focused on PBIS. April 1st, we'll do classroom-wide positive behavior supports, and April 29th, we'll look at Tier 3 function-based problem solving. So I will stick around in case you have any questions, but again, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the work that you do and you're caring for students to create positive and inclusive classrooms. It's
Thank you,
wonderful.
Dr. Burnett. Have a great weekend.
All right, thank you everyone. Hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Ma, nasa siya sa